Morning, everyone. It's a beautiful morning, and it's so beautiful to be together because this is our this is our last class before 5785. This is it. We're ending 5784, at least in our class today. And with that, it would only be proper if we tried to bring some Kabbalistic inspiration into our Rosh Hashanah, into the new year. I don't have to say that this year has been one of the most difficult years, maybe debatably the most difficult year for us as Jews. You know, someone said to me yesterday, like, what's going to be in it for 5785? And then he sighed and said, it can't get any worse. Well, I don't know if that's the right energy that I want to go into 5785 with. It's definitely, I'm calling it out because it's on a lot of our minds. So what I want to try to do today is I want to try to give some Kabbalistic insight into this new year and what does it mean. So Rosh Hashanah, a lot of people don't know this, but Rosh Hashanah, it is called the Coronation Night. It's the time when we decide whether or not we want God to be our king, so to speak. The metaphor, we've spoken about this before, but the metaphor that's often used is a metaphor that we in the 21st century have a hard time relating to, and that is the royalty and kingship. For many, many centuries, this is what people lived. They lived under royalty. I mean, today royalty is just kind of where there ever is royalty. It's just kind of not where the king with a scepter can decide the future of someone's life. So people, the Kabbalistic metaphors are always having to do, especially this time of year, with a king. And so imagine the coronation of the king, because you can't be a king over yourself. You need subjects. So the great spiritual masters would define the night of Rosh Hashanah as the coronation night. In 1974, Rabbi Yosef Dov Soleveitchik was a great, they called him the Brisker of. He was one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of the last century. When he was a young child, he said that when he was a young child learning in Jewish day school in Cheder, in the Russian village of I think it was of Chaslavitch, if I remember correctly. He said in the days that preceded Rosh Hashanah, he would recognize his teacher had this extraordinary sense of trepidation. He said that his teacher was a Chabad chassid. He was a Chabad rabbi. And he would say to us, do you know what Rosh Hashanah is? He would say the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the third Chabad Rebbe, would call the night of Rosh Hashanah the Coronation Night, the Coronation Night, as they spoke Yiddish. And then he would say to the children, do you know whom we will be coronating? And so the young Soloveitchik was a prodigy. He responds in jest. He says, Nicholas. And this was a number of years before the 1917 Russian Revolution, when Nicholas still served as the Russian Tsar. And the poor teacher of Chaslavitch, he says, Nicholas, he was coronated years ago. Why do we need to coronate him again? Besides, he's not a real king. And so he said, the teacher would say, tonight, my dear children, we coronate God. We place a crown on God. And do you know, he would say, who places the crown? And then he would go on, Yankel the tailor, and Beryl the shoemaker, and Zalman the water carrier, and Yussel the painter, and David the butcher, and on, all of the folk of the town. And he would announce each one of them, and each one of them places the crown on the king. And Rabbi Soleveitchik concluded his sermon, and he said, over the years, I've given many sermons, and I have written many discourses on the concept of Rosh Hashanah. But nothing, he says, ever made me feel the true depth and power of the day as the words of my childhood teacher. And he said, every year, when I recite the Rosh Hashanah prayers, and in the prayers I recite the words that you rule over the whole world in your glory, he said, I remember my teacher and what that means in coronating God as king. I think about this because how much of Judaism is compressed in this brief conversation between teacher and students? In a few words, a poverty-stricken Jewish teacher in a small shtetl in Russia gave his, I think, 7-year-old students, I think there were 7, his 7-year-old students, the core, the essence, the very marrow of Jewish existence, of Jewish thought. Now, he didn't need to explain to them why they should continue Jewish life, continue living as Jews, be proud of their Judaism, as so many teachers and educators today talk to kids about being proud of being Jewish. It's a conversation that's come up a lot this year. It was more than obvious. Who would want to miss out on the opportunity to coronate God? Now, this is so foreign to us. Think about it. It wasn't that long ago, just in a shtetl, less than 100 years ago. This is the conversation they were having. And you and I, you're like, okay, it's a nice story, but it's not amazing. It's not the way you're making it out to be, Rabbi. So what I want to talk about and ask is, why does God need us to coronate him? It seems very elementary. If God created us, does God really need us to declare him king? God's the boss, regardless of what we do. I mean, what does it mean that God's our king? I mean, imagine, this is how I picture it at least. Imagine you assemble 1,000,000 ants and you declare yourself king over the ants. Hello, all ants, I am your king. When 50,000 of them then turn left instead of right, and then you kill them in a single instance because they're ants, does that make you king over them? God gave us our entire existence. Our entire being and life force come from God. Relative to God, we're far smaller and far less significant than an ant in the presence of a human. So, can he then said to be our king? I mean, is that not an insult? It seems strange. You follow my problem? I think in order to answer this, one of the greatest ideas of Judaism lays right here. And this is the Kabbalistic idea. God, the perfect, endless, infinite, right? Infinite. There's no end. Desired to be a king, not through power or by the dictates of nature. God desired to be chosen as king and wanted a relationship with someone, a human, distinct of God, who would freely choose to construct a relationship with God. So an infinite, omnipotent, I just took that word out of the prayer book, an infinite God suspends the infinity, suppresses the endless, and conceals this omnipotence, this infinity, in order to allow space for an intelligent, independent, and self-oriented human being who is then capable of choosing God as his or her king. So what happens? The night of Rosh Hashanah, the great masters, the Kabbalists say, that something incredible happens. God creates, and I'm going to use this word that we've used so many times in this class, the tzimtzum. Once again, creates the vacuum, removes himself from this world, and waits. Will these beings that God created freely and independently choose God once again? That's the question. Now, we do have free choice, and so therefore we don't have to. There are a vast majority of people today, as in the Jewish community, who, according to Jewish law, we would call them a tinok shenishba, which means a child who was never educated. Most people don't even know that it's Rosh Hashanah because no one ever told them. And it's not their fault. And then there's a minority of people who know it's Rosh Hashanah and choose not to engage with it. And then there are a bunch more people, like ourselves, who know it's Rosh Hashanah and we choose to engage with it. Yet within that engagement, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to me? What does God mean to me? What is this idea of choosing God? So we have so many different frameworks that we can use in order to choose God. Let's talk about maybe some of the past generation. A lot of people in the past generation were much more knowledgeable than us, but they went through a lot more trauma than us. And so going through that trauma, choosing God on Rosh Hashanah was PTSD for them. They had to ask themselves questions, and they framed it. Framing is an amazing thing. They had to frame, and we all frame every part of the conversation. So there was two people, generally speaking, who came out of the Holocaust with two different ideas. One said, where was God? And the other one said, where wasn't God? So many of that generation felt that God abandoned them. I'm not here to tell them what to believe or think. That's their experience, and heaven forbid should anyone tell anyone what they're experiencing, that their experience is wrong. But it was their framing. Today, so many of us are products of that framing, but we didn't choose that framing. We didn't decide. And not only that, and that's why they call many of us second and third generation survivors. They don't say we're the children and grandchildren of survivors, but rather that we're second and third generation survivors because we carry a lot of that without having gone through it. And so in our lifetimes, many of us have done the work, continue to do the work. It's a lifelong struggle to go through and to be able to make that choice. The choice to be free in our generation is a choice that takes a tremendous amount of self-work. And that's why it's so foreign to us. We have to make the choice to be free, which means we can't decide and continue to take on the struggles of our parents because we didn't have those struggles and we don't have those struggles. Actually, we can't even relate to those struggles. In our world, apples grow in aisle 2. Last Sunday, my family, we went to an apple orchard, beautiful apple orchard on the border of Canada and the US. It was literally on the border. And we were walking out of the apple orchard, and in the back, I saw a migrant family run across, and I could see 2 of the kids picking up apples off the ground. It's probably the first little bit of food they had that day. We don't understand. Thank God. So many of us live in this very fortunate time in the world. And I would say on top of that fortunate time, we overlay every other experience that everyone has ever had, both current and past, with our time. It's a huge issue and a product of Western civilization that we think that everyone thinks and is just like us. And we take our privileged experiences and overlay them on people's experiences that maybe are not so privileged as we are. And so we have all of these different parts that we have to bring to Rosh Hashanah. We have to bring the past that we were born into, that we didn't choose. We have to bring the past of our lives that we did or didn't choose, which means it was passive or active. We have to bring the current world situation and everything that's going on and how we react to it, how we frame it. We have to bring all these parts. And then at that time, we're asking to even remotely have a relationship with a higher power. Now, the higher power is past, present, and future, and will exist whether or not we want to have a relationship. But what our job is to create the synapse. We have to create that relationship. The same way as adults, we have to then reframe and create a relationship with those people who created relationships with us. Think about, let's say, a relationship with our parents. For many years of our life, the relationship with our parents is created by them. It's their narrative. But at some point, and it could be when we're 10 or 20 or 30 or 40, or it could be that we can't even figure it out until we're 70 or 80. That's your choice. But at some point, we have to decide what is that relationship with our parents on my terms. And that is becoming an adult. And so for me, this is the greatest metaphor for Rosh Hashanah. How do you choose your relationship? And the greatest relationship that you have to figure out, how do you choose it on your own terms, is your relationship with a higher power, your relationship with God. That's the greatest relationship that you need to choose. And it has to be done from your framing, from your perspective. So what do you need? What are the tools that you need to be able to frame that relationship? And that's what's happening the night of Rosh Hashanah. The first thing you need is God to create the space, which means if God was a smotherer, which means we could see God, we could say, hello, Father, or whatever you want to call it. I don't like to use gender. The language is usually gender specific. God is not gender specific. So hello, okay, let's just for the sake of language say Father in heaven, because that's what the prayers use. If we could see that, we could say, okay, look, this is my list. This is my Santa list for the year. And please, I expect the check in the mail, and thank you very much. Then it wouldn't be free. It wouldn't be done in our own volition. What's beautiful is that you can live in a world, and God, through Tzimtzum, is so removed that you can actually not even believe that God exists. That's how removed God is. And so Rosh Hashanah, as the sun sets, there's one more little layer. God completely removes and waits. Will my children have a relationship? All these years, I've been calling you. And if I don't call you my kids, we don't have a relationship. Now I want to know, are you going to call me? And not in the guilt way. Not when the son calls his mother and she says, I haven't eaten in 3 days. And he says, why haven't you eaten in 3 days? And she says, because I didn't want my mouth full in case you called. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a mature conversation. Can I, with all of my past, with all of my different parts, with everything that I've exiled, can I develop a relationship with a higher power, with God? Can I look at God and say, what the heck is going on in this world? That's a framing. Or I can look at God and say, I know you gave people free choice and people are making really bad choices. Please help us here. I know, dear God, it's not your fault because you truly gave free choice. And there's a lot of people in the world who are not making good choices. Help us make good choices. So, the spiritual masters, the Kabbalists explained the meaning of Rosh Hashanah. Why is it today? Because it's the day that the first human was created. It's Adam and Eve's birthday. Six days beforehand, on the 25th of Elul on our calendar, was the day the world began being created. And on the sixth day of creation, the first humans were created. It's right there in the beginning of Genesis. And that day was the day of Rosh Hashanah. We're not celebrating the creation of the world. We're celebrating the creation of the first humans. The day when small, frail, vulnerable, and lowly human beings invited and continue every single year. This one will be 5,785 years. For 5,785 years, these lowly, vulnerable beings continue to say, God, you are our king. God could place his own crown on his head, but then he would be a dictator, not a king. And the relationship, it would be coerced, not chosen. And so God waits all year for this great moment for which the entire universe was created, for you and I to coronate God as the king. That moment when you and I can say, yes, I accept. I believe that Rosh Hashanah is the most moving day on the Jewish calendar, more than any other day. It embodies the meaning of human existence and the vulnerability of a God who is infinite, but decided to link his fate, God's fate, to ours. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is. It's the choice that God made to link God's fate, the future of this relationship with us, with you and I. The true symbol of free choice. I can talk about this all day, but I want to wish you a beautiful Rosh Hashanah. And may this Rosh Hashanah, may we take a little more time to pray, a little more time to pray for the hostages, 101 of them that need to be released immediately, to pray for peace, to pray for all of those whose minds and hearts having trouble connecting, trouble integrating, people who have trouble feeling, people who have trouble thinking, all of those who need to make really, really difficult decisions to keep democracy going over this year. All of those who need to see and frame the world in a different light. Right now, the world needs radical positivity. We can wax poetic about doomsday and the end of humanity. That's not what the world needs. There's enough of that going on. The world needs us to be radically positive. The world needs us to believe again. The world needs us to have faith again. And the world needs us to look at God and say, I accept. And may we be able to do that with joy, with love, and with all of our hearts connected. The beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Rosh Hashanah.